Hi, this is Kevin from Let Me Tech You, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over some tips on becoming a cloud engineer. Not necessarily for just beginners, but maybe there's some people in IT looking to pivot. I'm going to give a little bit of background on how I kind of shifted into the cloud, and just some ways that you can kind of keep enhancing your abilities to learn using Azure. So, just a little bit about me. I'm currently a cloud engineer for Chipotle. I didn't always start. I haven't been here too long, but previously, my last 8 9 years, I was an on-prem network administrator for a window manufacturer, and I basically just managed their entire corporate infrastructure, everything from VMware, Cisco networking, firewalls, um, all our stuff was basically just on prem. End user support. We had some cloud that we kind of started baking in for like Office 365 stuff, but some Commvault backups, things like that. But me personally, I always had a passion for networking. Um, I kind of took a lot of certifications as far as the CCNA, the CCNT, built my own home labs with various networking gear. But, as I started to kind of grow in that field, there was only so much I can kind of take it. For example, you know, Cisco, a lot of their gear being it hardware based, I couldn't really like practice a lot unless I had some type of software. And one of those softwares, which is outside of the scope of this video, but I'll just show it. It's called EV&G, and I've used this a lot. I actually have some videos on how I set this up at my home to help grow my networking career. But the thing with networking in certain environments that you're in, there's not going to be a lot of change, innovation you can provide. Equipment costs a lot of money to get. A lot of times you may not have the resources to build separate dev test networks to test things. So a lot of your deployments are happening at night, on the weekends, things like that. So with the cloud, there's a big shift in the ability to be more agile, move quicker, have redundancy built in, a lot of those different things. And some of the stuff I haven't even touched on as far as, you know, just the whole security around it, always being up to date. And it could be a lot cheaper depending on your instance of needing to be in the cloud. So, what I'm going to do is kind of go in through here. And so, just kind of going back on that, I started to basically take my journey into the cloud by signing up for AWS, Azure, and building my own networks at home, and actually utilizing some of those cloud resources for my own personal gain, whether it be my own blog sitting in the cloud. I use some of the storage for my own personal backups as far as in Azure. I'm using Office 365 for my own personal email. So I have my own domain. I get my own personal email. So, letmetechyou.com is the domain that I'm using. So I started to kind of just build out these networks and understand how I could utilize some of these resources in Azure. And then as the window manufacturer that I worked for started to slowly utilize the cloud, I was able to take some of the knowledge that I've already known and apply it to certain projects that we were working on, whether it be needing load balancers or some type of automation, things like that. So the first thing you're going to want to do is, if you're really interested in getting into the cloud, you can pick any particular, Google Cloud, Azure, AWS, but I would say Azure and AWS are two of the biggest. I would say Azure, from my experience, Azure and AWS are kind of neck and neck, but Azure has a big presence in probably a lot of companies you'll be close to, just because of the Office 365 aspect of it being built in. But each one has their, things that kind of make them better than the other, but they're kind of becoming pretty similar in terms of feature sets. So the first thing you're going to want to do is sign up for an Azure account. And if you go to azure.microsoft.com, which I have here, you can basically sign up and it's free. And when I say free, it's free in terms of you being able to sign up, you get some free credits, and they have it to where there's certain things that are actually free forever or free for a limited time. So let me see if I can open up a new window. And I believe they show it. I thought maybe because I was already signed in before. Let's see if I can get an overview. Pay as you go price. Okay, so yeah. So here are some of the advantages of the free product. So they got API management. They have a free period for that. App service, so you can deploy, like maybe a simple website or something you want to test. Just some of the other things down here you can see. Now everything's not something you would particularly be using a lot. That's the thing with Azure and some of these cloud providers. You're going to get into a lot of things that you'll never touch, and that's fine. It's just a big tool set for companies to be able to pick and choose what they want to do, and that's the great thing about the cloud. And as you can see, you'll probably spend a lot of your time in virtual machines, virtual networks, and maybe some gateway type stuff like NAT gateways and things of that nature. So once you get signed up, one of the things I would also recommend is reading through their documentation. And you can go to learn.microsoft.com, and they have tons of documentation on things. You can do some learn by doing. And what I usually do is I'll go to Google and I'll do like Azure networking. And then as you can see, they'll come up with various networking things to kind of read about. Or you can do Azure Virtual Machines. And then the learn.microsoft.com actually does things where it'll do like tutorials or how-to guides. So, it'll actually walk you through how to do some of these specific network best practices, labs, things like that. But I wouldn't really kind of focus on actually doing some of those yet, because you want to get familiar with actually how the Azure portal works, and you can navigate it. So once you get set up with that, some people are big certification people. So you can actually do the Azure certification paths. And a lot of people start out with the AZ900. They got different roles, whether you want to be an administrator, an AI engineer, you could be a developer. DevOps is becoming big. You can be a solution architect. So people who maybe architect solutions for the business, depending on the business needs. You have security, which is big because you have to be able to secure not only your stuff, but maybe something for yourself, in a sense. If you're using like your own homelab, you don't want things to get compromised. You don't want your account to get taken over and someone runs your bill up, things like that. So there's some security aspects in there. And like I said, the AZ900 is one of the first ones people kind of look at to kind of get themselves going just on the fundamentals of Azure. But if you're one of a more of a hands-on person, or you're already in tech, or you know a little bit about the cloud, you might want to skip, maybe some of that if you're familiar with, like, say, AWS, or you've been inside Azure before. So once you get your account set up, one thing you're going to want to really do is build a lab. And that's the great thing about the cloud versus how it was when I was an on-prem network administrator. A lot of the cloud stuff allows you to grow a lab way faster. You can build it up, tear it down. And I do a lot of that through automation using Terraform, which I have a ton of videos on my page about. But I wouldn't even, if you're like not even really into the cloud yet, I would really focus on more so learning the manual process of setting a lot of these things up. That way, once the abstraction comes with using something like a Terraform or CloudFormation, if you're using AWS, you'll actually know what's being deployed in the background. So when I get into these things here, the first thing that comes up when you first sign in, and you're going to come to this screen, and everything is, so Azure has a bunch of regions, and I won't get into like the entire layout of where all the regions are, availability zones, things like that, because you'll learn a lot of that as you grow. And so how you can think of this is Azure has a bunch of data centers all across the world, and they have this dashboard that essentially you can click some buttons and spin up anything you kind of want, no matter where you're at, and you'll give yourself or your customers access to those resources. So those data centers, with me being in the US, I would use a lot of regions that's in the US, whether it be central. They have some regions in the East Coast and the West Coast. And depending on where you deploy some of those resources, you will incur different charges. But if you stick with some of the lower tier things, there aren't a lot of charges that you'll be getting charged with. So the first thing is everything sits inside of some type of resource group. And resource group, just think of it as like a bucket, a collection of resources that share a current a similar life cycle. Like if you are, say, building a web app or a home lab, you would create, like, say, a resource group that's going to hold all the resources inside of that. So I can name this home lab. And as I was mentioning the regions, these are all the regions that are across around the world. So you got East US, East US 2, South Central US, West US 2, West US 3. Then we got Central US here. So as you can see, those are all the ones that you can choose to deploy that in, and then that's going to also be kind of dependent on like how you deploy some of your resources as well. I'm going to go ahead and choose East US. Now you can add tags, and tagging is great because what it does is it allows you to kind of organize some of the things that you create to understand what it was built for or who built it. So, you might do like a purpose name or key, and then the value could be home lab. And then maybe you can do another one that says built by, and then Kevin Sims, stuff like that. So now when you come back a week or a month later, you can understand, oh, this was a home lab that I built. Or, if this is a company, you can know who did what and things like that. And so we'll review and create that. So there's no charge for that. That doesn't charge anything. But what we're going to build is our own home lab in this video. And this is actually something you can walk through, build for yourself, and be able to utilize immediately, whether it be a server that you use when you're away from home. You could deploy some type of like application inside of there that you want to test with. Like testing like software that you don't want to test on your personal computer, or you could use it for the ability to use on a day-to-day basis. If you don't have a powerful enough computer, you would only need a web browser or not a RDP client to access it, whether it's Windows or Linux if you're SSHing into it. So I'm going to look for, a VM is encompassed of a VNet, which has a subnet that your VM virtual machine will sit inside of. And if you want to access that VM, you're going to need some type of way to access the internet. And you would typically either run it through a NAT gateway, which will, if you're not familiar with networking, that just kind of masks, it gives your private IP addresses an internet routable IP address to be able to get out to the internet. And then any device behind that can use that. So you don't have to worry about exposing your endpoints to the internet. Or some people, they just go ahead and attach public IP addresses directly to their servers, and then they access them that way, and then they just lock it down to like a specific IP address or something, so that other people can't get to it. So I'm going to look up virtual machine. Now, initially, you would want to set up a virtual network first, but you can actually do that through the the virtual machine setup. So you don't have to actually, if you want to actually build everything separate, you can, or you can come in here and just do what I'm going to do and learn as you're building it out. And then you can actually come back and build another VNet and then take it away from there, based on how you want to set that up. So the VM name, you can name this anything you want. I'm just going to call it homelab. And I'm going to put this in East US, in the same region my resource group is in. So the availability zones is basically a way to deploy VMs in different kind of, they're like data centers within that region. So like if one fails, if you had another resource in another zone, you could still access it within that region and things like that. But you don't have to worry about it here. We only need one zone. And I'm going to look for a Windows. Let's look for a Windows 11 image there. And I'm going to find something. So these prices, as you can see, so $70 a month. And basically that pricing is based off of if you ran this for an entire month without shutting it down or deallocating it. So when you're not using it, you can actually shut it down and incur less cost because it's not continually running, based off of, now you will still get charged for like disk utilization, things like that. So you'll want to make sure if you're not utilizing it, you destroy it or just turn it off when you're not using it. But I always go for destroying it because a lot of my home lab stuff is things that I'm just testing for that particular moment in time. So if you're wanting to learn like Windows related stuff in Azure, you could opt to go with a server. And I'll stick with that there because I'm going to actually delete it anyway once the video's over. And then we'll want to give this a username. And then a password. So let me. And then, so it's going to have inbound port rules. So this is saying select which virtual machine network ports are accessible from the public internet. You can specify more limited or granular network access on the networking tab. So we're going to just do all that on the networking tab there. You can choose this if you're licensing, if you have like your own licensing, or usually with a company. This basically just reduces the cost because you already own using the hybrid. You already own your licenses basically. So I'm just gonna uncheck that because, like, again, I'm just gonna be deleting this. So your disk type. So you can choose between SSD, standard SSD, or standard HDD. I usually just keep it with the premium. And then you can add additional hard disk drives. So this will be if you want to add some additional drives to store things on or run applications off of. So I'm just going to keep that as it is. And this is where the virtual network comes in. So as you can see, we're going to create a new home lab VNet. So this VNet is what kind of sits, what everything within this environment will sit in. And your IP address ranges, all that type of stuff. You don't have to kind of worry about this too much if you're just building this to run some home lab type stuff in. But if you're in a corporate network environment, this is a very crucial point in actually making sure that your allocating IP address space to VNets, but you're not also overlapping IPs that you have in other VNets or other parts of your network. Now, it's not to say that you can't put those IP address ranges in here. So if, like, say your corporate building is using a 192.168.1.0, you can come in here and put a 192.168.1.0. But the problem will arise if you ever need to connect these two networks together. Now you're in a problem because you have to re-IP or do some type of natting to make it look like it's coming from a different source IP address, things like that. And it just gets real ugly having to do all that later on when you can kind of practice and get everything perfectly set up the correct way immediately. So I'm going to keep this all default. I'm going to keep the default subnet. I'm going to add an IP address to this because I'm not going to create a NAT gateway to attach to the subnet. I'm just going to use this, put this public IP directly on my machine here. So then we're going to need a security group. And this security group is basically going to allow RDP from any source to any destination is going to be allowed. Now we're going to get some type of notification on that because we're essentially allowing RDP from the outside, from the internet to, so basically anyone from the internet can access this VM if they were to get the username and password and the IP address there. So a lot of this other stuff you can disregard. You get into like being able to log in with your Azure AD, things like that. Enable system assign manage identity. You can enable backups, whether you want to back up site recovery, guest OS update. So it just basically now it's just walking you down into the other stuff before you get into the creation process. So once this gets created here, basically now it's checking to make sure we have all our prerequisites. We have a virtual network, we have an IP address, we have disk, we have an OS created. So it's basically checking, making sure all that's in place. And then it's going to actually allow us to then go ahead and create this once it's done here. So now that that's in the validation pass there, we're going to go through and deploy this. Now it's being deployed, and in this screen here, this is actually a nice screen. So once you get more familiar with Azure and some of its automation processes, you'll actually be able to actually take some of this and utilize it in some of your automation. So as you can see this template, it's actually showing you everything that's being built. And you can actually download this, and you could change some of this to be more, not necessarily static, but modularized to the point where it's not like you're not actually, like, let me come in here and show you, for example. You see how some of these things, if you go through here, you'll see how some of the stuff will be, you know, like the skew, you know, maybe want to change that to be something different. Let's see here. There's some other stuff you can typically change to basically make it to where if you want to redeploy this in, like, say, another region, different namings, I think it's under our, you can see admin username, type string. So all of this is going to actually be, let me go back up here real quick. Okay, so as you can see, our parameters are basically has everything that the template is needing to build a homelab network interface, enable accelerated networking, network security group name. So all this is basically set up to allow you to change all of these variables or parameters and redeploy this here and basically build everything you are building the same way each and every time. And that's where things like Terraform comes into place, because you don't want to have to manually do what we did. Like, let's say, for instance, you need to deploy 50 servers or 50 desktops or whatever. You don't want to go and have to deploy that, click all those buttons 50 times, when you could use something like Terraform and do it in 10, 20, 30 seconds. So that's just an idea you want to keep an eye on when you're deploying scripts. You can download these and save them off to kind of look in them later. So we got everything deployed. We're going to go to our resources, and we're going to take us back to our resource group just to kind of show you everything that was built. So we got our homelab virtual machine. We got a public IP address that's attached to this virtual machine, and we can see that based off of our public IP address that's here, and it says homelab IP. So let's go back to our resource group. We have a network security group that's attached to our network interface. Now you can also attach that to your subnet. So let's say you have multiple VMs that's built within a subnet, and you want to govern them all with the same rules. You can attach that subnet to the same, that network security group to the same subnet to make it easier to maybe adjust rules and keep everything in the same governance policies. So if you can actually see that by going there, network security group, and you can see that has been attached there. And then this interface is attached to this VM. And as you can see, we're not having to do all of this stuff manually. It's already being done for us in the background. And then we have our disk here. So our VM's probably already up and running. So what I could do is now go ahead and log into this VM. So I'm going to open up my remote desktop tool here, and let's drag this over, bring this over here 1 second to my other screen. There we go. So now I'm going to add a PC. So I'm on a Mac, so I'm not using a typical RDP client you would see on a Windows machine. So it's the username and password that we created. So with this, you might need to know a little bit of networking. It does help. They make it a little easier, like I showed you, because like, had you have not built the VM or the VNets and stuff ahead of time, it walks you through making sure that you build those prior to trying to build a VM. And if you tried doing it without it, it's a good thing to learn, just to understand like what all goes into the process of getting a VM to run in the cloud. So now you basically have your own home lab. You can utilize this server for things like building like an Active Directory environment. You can do like some DNS things. You could install like some server applications, whether it be monitoring tools, any type of anything you want to learn, at the very cost of you just spending a couple maybe bucks a month. If you don't run it a lot, like I said, I use one of the higher tiers. They have cheaper free tiers that run very small resources, and they're still adequate enough to be able to work for the things that you need to do. So I'm going to hit this here. So as you can see, you can install, any of the roles and features you need. Go down to our PC. We got our one drive here. Well, our temp storage here. This, you don't want to do, you don't want to store anything on this. It's subject to loss, and it will not be recovered. It's just a temporary storage to, maybe utilize for some temp cache type stuff, things that's not really important. So I'm going to go ahead and sign out of this. Okay. So now, with that being said, you have you have your home lab. You can actually stop it here. This will deallocate it, so you're not being charged for it running, things like that. You can look at your bill by going to the cost management center. I won't go into it in here, but that'll be where you can actually see some of the stuff that is being charged on your account throughout the month. And just one more thing before we get off here. Another thing you may be interested in is actually storage accounts. So what these are it's storage in the cloud that you can utilize for various things, whether it be file shares, blob storage. Like, it's just it's not like a file share, but it's just storage that you can throw stuff into, and you just can't you can't map it to anything. You're basically just accessing it. So there's one of these things you can do as far as that. It's the same thing here. Create your storage account. It's going to take you through like some networking stuff. This is more so how do you want it to be able to access from all networks, selected networks. Oh, and then before we get too far off on the home lab section, if you want to further, this is what I was talking about where it says, hey, you are exposing 3389 to the internet. This is only recommended for testing. So you would typically be on a VPN or private connection if you were doing this more securely. And then your source would probably be either your my IP address, which will show it would use the IP address that your corporate network or your home network uses. Or you can do like service tags. So service tags allow you to do like, the virtual network. So if you're actually sitting on the virtual network, another machine, like a jump machine you're using, stuff like that. So there's a ton of other different resources you can get into. I would pretty much, like I said earlier, get into some of the documentation and kind of understand where do you want to see yourself as a cloud engineer. Do you want to, get into networking, architecture, DevOps? There's so many different things that you can get into. Office 365. There's a whole game of stuff there because you have Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive. A lot of things there has to be managed, whether it be Intune, network security. So it's, more people who kind of have started shifting over from the on-prem networks to VMware days. A lot of companies are switching to the cloud model, and it's been helping a lot because you can move on a lot of things faster versus waiting for new equipment to be purchased, or you purchase some router or server a year ago. Now it's out of the resources needed to service your customers and stuff like that. So once you get into there, and if you have any questions in regards to any of the setups you're doing, check out my blog, letmetechyou.com. I can actually bring this up here on the screen so you can see it. Go there, check out some of my documentation on cloud, some networking and automation stuff. Drop me a comment down below. I'll be sure to get back with you on any questions you may have. Again, I hope that this can help you kind of get started in your cloud journey, give you a little inspiration on something to help build and utilize. And then when you're done, which I'm actually going to do while I'm on the video here, is you can actually go to this resource group. Everything that's sitting in there, I'm just going to delete with one simple thing here. And that's going to get rid of everything. So that way you don't get charged for a bill that you forgot to turn off when you signed up. So again, thanks for tuning in. Like I said, I hope this helps for you to get have a nice little start on your cloud journey. Again, let me know if you have any questions down below. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next time.